Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. This is Borys Tizenhausen. In this issue, Patrushev threatens a nuclear strike for Kaliningrad. Are negotiations between Putin and Zelensky possible in the near future, or are these some new tricks from the Kremlin? And China wants an endless war in Ukraine while Matvienko is demanding Labubu. And why has newspeak died out, and why have pops and smoke disappeared in Russia? And also about how Serbia is planning to betray the Kremlin. And we'll also watch a video of a truly epic strike on Russian military-industrial facilities. All this and more in today's episode. There's a lot of interesting stuff ahead. So if you're new to this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Let's get into it. So, Patrushev showed up and said that any aggression against Kaliningrad would be met with a response, including a nuclear one. I quote, "Russia will respond to any military encroachment on the Kaliningrad region with all available means, including those provided for in the nuclear deterrence doctrine." And here he throws in another very interesting phrase. He also reminded that the Russian authorities have long been aware of the Western countries' plans regarding the region and assured that Russia has everything necessary to ensure its security. So what exactly are these plans of the Western countries regarding the region? And here there are several interesting points at once. Why did Patrushev suddenly show up and start threatening nuclear strikes if there is an attack on the Kaliningrad region? And who exactly is going to attack Poland and Lithuania, or who is planning to attack? Here's the thing. First of all, Russia has already shown that it is not ready to use all means, including nuclear ones, when someone enters their territory. This has been proven by the armed forces of Ukraine in the Kursk region. Did Russia use them? No, even though, according to their doctrine, they should have. And yet, to this day, a large number of Russians believe that Ukraine was planning to attack the Russian Federation first. I mean, how out of your mind do you have to be to come up with something like that? But they do believe it. And well, I asked them a reasonable question. Why didn't you just wait? Why didn't you wait? Then if Ukraine had attacked first, you definitely would have, since you consider yourself some kind of great army, second, first, I don't even know, defeated them. And no one would have imposed sanctions against Russia because Ukraine was supposedly going to attack first. Isn't that right? And no one would have given weapons to Ukraine either. By the way, what exactly was Ukraine supposed to attack with, in your opinion? Well, anyway, never mind. It's all clear with these people, the Russians. But still, it's amazing how they believe in this. On the other hand, this could be preparation for a similar provocation, but this time against Poland and Lithuania. Like, they wanted to attack us. We knew about their plans. Patrushev says, we know about these plans. They wanted to attack us, but we struck first. That's why we need to be very careful here. Although, as a rule, Russia starts making threats when things aren't going well for them. And we all know very well that what Patrushev and Putin are best at is blowing up the homes of their own citizens. I think everyone remembers the Ryazan sugar incident. And Ukraine and Russia have agreed on a personal meeting between Zelensky and Putin in Turkey. This was announced by Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. But he also added that it is necessary to conduct negotiations on the preparatory process gradually and methodically in order to avoid the breakdown of agreements and not to disturb the psychological balance of the participants. First, the parties must agree on the timing and mechanisms for a ceasefire, and only then discuss the final format of the meeting. We are open to dialogue, ready to provide a platform, Fidan said. I especially like the part about psychological balance. So as not to disturb what? The psychological balance of a maniac and a psychopath who is here and a murderer? Yeah, well, I think his has been disturbed since birth. By the way, I'm sure that Putin will do everything possible to avoid meeting with Zelensky. Until American sanctions loomed, they did not hide this in Russia. Remember? Illegitimate. We won't meet with him. Take it away. Sorry. Let's put some kind of UN government in Ukraine, something else. That is, they did everything to avoid talking to Zelensky. For Putin, this will be a terrible humiliation. But as soon as sanctions started looming in their usual negotiation style, they hint, yes, we're not really against it, but there are a few things that need to be sorted out. So their goal now is to get another 50 days or maybe even 100 days. Their goal is to make sure there are no sanctions after Donald Trump's ultimatum expires. And their goal is to make sure Ukraine doesn't get missiles right now. These are the objectives they're pursuing. That's why they'll lie, saying a meeting is possible, and then they'll sabotage it themselves, believe me. The closer we get to the end of the ultimatum, the more accommodating the Russians will become. But there's only one way to negotiate with the Russians. Just hit them with everything you've got. Hit them with sanctions, hit them with missiles, strike, and strike again. When they finally throw up their hands and say, all right, we're ready to meet at the highest level and agree to a ceasefire, even then, keep hitting them, because you can be sure they'll mess things up somewhere again. By the way, about the 50-day ultimatum. Putin himself insisted that he needed 60 days for the offensive. Well, soon half of that time will have passed, and only 1 month will be left. How's that offensive going, by the way? Victorious. And what about the Navy Day Parade, I'd like to ask? It was supposed to be held in St. Petersburg tomorrow. It's been cancelled? I talked about this yesterday. What happened? I'd like to ask. And what happened is that there's not a single safe place left in the very heart of Russia, you see? And Putin understood that maybe when he's out there on his little boat sailing around the ships, something might come flying down from the sky right into his bald little cabin. Of course, he got scared. He was also afraid that maybe a new web would appear. Rooftops would open up, I don't know, tanks would open, kiosks would open, and these drones would start flying, and those high-heeled types would start running, trampling each other, falling from the stands. And that's what he was afraid of. And now, a bit about those who are launching these drones. Let me remind you, we have an important fundraiser for the crew of the strike UAVs of the 252nd Battalion. They need to upgrade the heavy drone Magura in order to destroy more of this filth. So let's help our warriors. I've told you about them before. They're really awesome, all kinds of people, ranging from 20 to 60 years old. So yeah, let's help out. The link to donate is in the description of this video and also in the comments. And if you happen to be watching not on my channel, here's a QR code. It leads directly to the donation page. And there are also payment details for those who want to help from abroad. As always, I want to say a huge, truly heartfelt thank you, both from myself and from our soldiers. And there was another event that happened yesterday. The day before, I got a call and was told there was a chance to meet someone very special to me. And yesterday, that meeting took place. So we met up. Here's the photo. This is Caesar from the Legion. A huge hello and thank you for the fundraiser we completed. At the end of this video, at the end of this episode, there will be a video from the Legionnaires expressing their gratitude. So, thank you so much. By the way, friends, have you noticed that the bangs and smoke have disappeared? Before it was either a bang or smoke, nothing was hit, nothing is burning. And then suddenly, boom, everyone started saying war all at once. Did you notice that? Even Putin started saying war. Old ladies on the street started saying war. She says, we're at war. I recently showed you one woman who said, and how many of our boys have died in the war? Oh dear, all my nephews are without arms, without legs, some are missing, and so on. So everyone started saying war, and even the acting governor of the Kursk region, Kinstein, remember, said, where are we supposed to get you the money? We're at war. So what happened? Why did the newspeak disappear? By the way, this whole thing, they, along with their propaganda, with the basics of propaganda, with the main talking points, this story about newspeak, they actually borrowed it from Nazi Germany. Well, to be fair, let's say that the United States also used it during the Vietnam War. There too, it wasn't called a war, but aggression, a conflict, and so on. Then the Soviet Union used it in Afghanistan. It wasn't a war, but fulfilling an international duty. What kind of duty? Who exactly did you owe something to over there? But that's not the point right now. The disappearance of newspeak. First of all, why did it disappear? Because internal crisis processes have intensified. Calling it a war became much more convenient because it's much easier to justify what's happening in Russia now. Tax hikes, higher utility bills, the state running out of money, the deaths of thousands and thousands of Russians by saying it's a war rather than this so-called special military operation. Yes, we're at war. Everyone to the front. What money are you talking about? Everything is going to the front. Like Kinstein, right? Look at how many have died. Just like in 41, sacrifices for the sake of the motherland. So that's why naturally calling it a war has become more advantageous both psychologically and politically in this case. Plus, they've come up with another thing. They've merged the Second World War with this war. That's why now, both there and here, it's a fight against Nazism, a threat to the nation's existence. We're saving the world from evil, a historic mission. You've all heard this before. But you can't just merge the war and this so-called special. It needs to be on a bigger, more powerful scale. That's why the newspeak disappears, the special operation disappears, and war appears. They've switched to the language of a sacred war. And of course, on top of that, there are heroes, feats, sacrifices, the Great War, the Holy War, like Patriarch Kirill, that FSB rat said. For him, it's a holy war. You'll get your holy war. Plus, real threats are growing inside Russia. What I was talking about, the parade was cancelled, drones are flying thousands of kilometers away, oil refineries are exploding. What's going on? Muscovites can already hear the buzzing. Everyone can hear the explosions. The drones have become more powerful. The drones have become more serious, flying farther. What kind of smoke and bangs are we talking about here? They're already hitting hard now. And the war rhetoric allows them to mobilize the population through fear. So it's war. And to create this siege mentality, enemies all around, everyone is against us. A big, terrifying war. That's why, of course, now that's it. Now there will be war, now everything will get serious. By the way, enough about war and profit. Representatives of the US and China got into a heated exchange over Ukraine at a UN Security Council meeting. The United States told China that it must stop fueling Russia's aggression in Ukraine, and Beijing's statements that it has imposed strict export controls on dual-use goods fall apart in the face of daily discoveries of Chinese-made components in drones, weapons, and vehicles that Russia uses against Ukraine. This was stated by the acting US ambassador to the UN. Or rather, she. Well, China, of course, is not us. We don't help anyone. We generally, although in reality, of course, this is a lie. A Chinese spokesman said China is not a party to the conflict and has never provided lethal weapons to either side. Lies, lies, lies. Maybe they didn't supply entire drones, but they definitely sent components. So if you send it disassembled, that means it's not considered a weapon, right? And then there's an article coming out that says China, an endless war in Ukraine is beneficial for China. It's a very good article. And China is increasing its role in helping Russia. So the recent statement that China won't let Russia lose is all part of the same topic. Why does China want an endless war in Ukraine? Well, first of all, China plays the long game and does so quietly. That is, Europe and the US are distracted and worn out by this war. That's perfect. China is completely satisfied with that. Russia should be weakened to a certain point, but not fall apart. Just weakened, but not collapse. And then China can stay on the sidelines and increase its influence. Plus, there's also internal division within the European Union. All of this is exactly what China needs. And on top of that, there's the conflict between the United States and Europe. Wonderful. So China is getting bonuses from every direction here. Raw materials from Russia at rock-bottom prices, oil, gas, timber, uranium. Putin is just rushing to sign off on more and more deals with thousands of hectares of forest being cut down. Well, what can you do? Plus, Russia has become a huge market for Chinese goods. I think that's one of the conditions. You'll buy everything from us. We'll even be the ones making cars under the Moskvich brand. The dependence on Chinese technology is enormous. And then there's the policy of submission. What else can Putin do? The worse things get for Putin, the stronger his friendship with Xi Jinping becomes. Friendship in quotes, of course. And if the war suddenly ends, then all sorts of unpleasant processes could start happening inside the Russian Federation. That's a threat to stability on China's borders. So how will Russia start to break apart? Into what pieces? Who will end up with the nuclear weapons? How will these fragments relate to China? All of this, these are things that need to be considered. That's why the war is beneficial for Beijing. And that's why Beijing, they're cutting off Iran, either with sanctions or with war, and they're cutting off the shadow fleet with sanctions. China is being forced to get more and more involved in helping the Russian Federation. That's why it's unpleasant. So by the way, let's start with not buying Chinese goods. And in general, I think China needs to be brought into the open no matter how much it resists. And with all these investigations that are now being launched in large numbers, we need to point the finger at Chinese companies, at Chinese intermediaries, to bring to light the logistics chains, what goes where. Just recently, there was a report that China, under the guise of refrigeration equipment, is supplying engines for drones. Everyone involved is being sanctioned. Anyone who is involved, sanctions are imposed. Hit their credibility, hit their reputation, make Russia so toxic that people there start to think twice. In other words, China is the main beneficiary of a prolonged war, and sanctions against Chinese companies have already started to be introduced. This is a wake-up call for China. There are 50 Chinese companies on the US sanctions list that supply chips, machinery, drones, and electronics to Russia. Impose secondary sanctions on those who pave the way for Chinese goods. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, the United Arab Emirates. Publicly. And also direct sanctions against major Chinese corporate giants such as Huawei, for example. Plus an informational counteroffensive, breaking the myth of China as a peacemaker. They keep repeating their mantra, we're not a party to the conflict, we're not helping anyone. So what about these 50 Chinese companies? And what about Chinese banks? Now, everyone involved in circumventing sanctions, anyone helping Russia bypass sanctions, will end up on the lists. That's why these investigations have started now. By the way, do you remember the recent arrest of Chinese spies in Kyiv? They were exposed. All of this is going to start coming out now, and it will be very, very hard to wash off that reputation afterwards. And even better, to tie it to a topic that's already widely discussed and extremely sensitive and problematic for China, the Uyghur genocide. All the more so because shipments from China pass specifically through the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Since it borders 8 countries, it's the largest by area and a key transportation hub for China's Belt and Road Initiative. And they're also targeting the Belt and Road Initiative, saying, look, North Korea is sending troops and all that, shells and so on. But who is really behind all of this? Without technology, without machinery, without navigation, without chips, without all of that, Russia won't be able to wage war. And it's certainly not North Korea providing that help, right? In general, this is a convenient region, and targeting the history of the Uyghur genocide is exactly what's needed. Because this region, by the way, is almost entirely controlled by China's Ministry of State Security, since a repressive regime has been established there. Well, I won't go deeper into the topic of the Uyghurs, by the way, but it is an interesting subject. To my shame, when I started looking into the issue, it turns out that Uyghurs actually look more like Kyrgyz or Tajiks. I mean, really, they're definitely not Chinese, definitely not. And of course, there are questions about autonomy and all that. There are entire camps set up there. They've herded the Uyghurs into them. Their culture is being destroyed and so on. But China has already been sanctioned for this. So bringing up these two topics about the Uyghurs and China is just a very sensitive subject for them. That's why connecting the two to make it a big informational thing is the way to go. This morning, Ukrainian drones attacked the Stavropol region, and they actually hit the Signal Radio Electronic Systems plant. Let's take a look at the video. Yes, locals are saying that it hit the workshop directly. And this Signal plant specializes in producing various types of electronic warfare systems, radio navigation equipment, remote control devices, and so on. Naturally, it works for the Russian military-industrial complex. And once again, the Nevinomaisk explosives plant was also hit. I think they'll keep targeting it there. In other words, they're hitting it hard. And just yesterday I was telling you about this demographic special forces. Matvienko and the headliner Matvienko, in my opinion, that's more like an anti-demographic special forces. So Matvienko showed up again, and she says that you can't surprise the world with Matryoshka dolls anymore. She decided to provide a detailed comment on this particular Labubu toy, and she explicitly states, so, in China, a very astute businessman meticulously created it, diligently developed it, and is now making a truly substantial amount of money from this venture. What, are we not capable of doing something like that? Yeah, you really can't surprise anyone with Matryoshka dolls anymore. By the way, you stole Matryoshka dolls too. From China, by the way. Matryoshka dolls aren't impressive. We need something of our own. You've seen this Labubu, says Matvienko. It's a freak, can't even look at it, says Matvienko. And speaking of freaks, you've got one sitting right there in the Kremlin, so watching a 1.5-meter high heel is just as unbearable. Anyway, yesterday she was creating a demographic special forces unit. Today she wants to copy some Chinese doll. It's just hopeless Soviet stuff, to be honest. All they can do is steal, make a bad copy, or just rename things. And that's in the best case scenario. That's been proven by Vukusnoy Tochka, right? And if they start creating something themselves, then you better just run for cover. They've already made a Russian smartphone and tablet. Medvedev once famously bragged about it. All the essential components are completely non-Russian, but at least it's proudly called something in Russian. This particular approach of, oh, let's simply take what someone else did exceptionally well and then just do the exact same thing ourselves. You absolutely won't accomplish anything meaningful with such a strategy. Remember how another Komsomol member, Lukashenko, was happy that McDonald's left Belarus and said, what, we can't slice a bun and put a patty in it ourselves? You can't do all that? You can't. As it turns out, you can't slice a patty, you can't make a smartphone, you can't make a doll, you can't even make nails? Matvienko was surprised. How is it that we can't make nails ourselves? No. Lukashenko has managed things so well that there's no more potatoes in Belarus. And he was planning to copy McDonald's. Well, yet another stab in the back for the Russian Federation. Or maybe not even in the back. Serbia has announced its readiness to impose sanctions against Russia in exchange for EU membership. Serbia may impose sanctions against Russia if the prospect of the country joining the European Union becomes clear. This was stated by Serbia's Minister for European Affairs. How could this be? How could you, brothers, how could you trade steadfast Russia for the decaying West? This must be very, very hurtful. And here's another upsetting piece of news. The European Union is planning to shorten by another year the timeline for phasing out Russian gas. In other words, the European Parliament is proposing to speed up the complete ban on importing Russian gas. The current deadline is set for January 2028, but they want to move it up to the beginning of 2027. Orban, send in the troops. What is going on? Why do they all dislike Russia so much? Why is it Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Finland? Why are they mining the borders? Why don't you like Russians? What kind of people are you, really? Well, because you just shouldn't be awful people. Isn't that right? And you, my friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. If you can, please support the fundraiser for our soldiers. Wishing us all a peaceful day. And of course, glory to Ukraine. Then now here comes the video I mentioned from the Legionnaires. They say they are incredibly grateful to you.
Friends, we did this together with you. Thank you for helping us reach the 2 million revenue goal for the development of UAVs for the Freedom of Russia Legion. These funds will go towards the development of both strike drones and aerial reconnaissance, as well as heavy aircraft, wings, and our workshop. Thanks to you, we are becoming even more effective. Your donations are our eyes in the sky, our strikes against the occupiers, and the lives we saved. In fact, you raised these 2 million hryvnias for us in record time. And what you see in front of me now is only a small part of what we have acquired with these donations. And I see several units of our drone systems and many months of work with the best equipment. 10 hryvnias, 5 hryvnias, 10,000 hryvnias, it doesn't matter how much. Every day you make a choice in favor of freedom. And thanks to you, we continue to fight for truth, for freedom, for victory. Glory to Ukraine.
Freedom to Russia.